The infinite is surely a fascinating concept. Some say it's where mathematics and philosophy meet. And yet there's a glaring asymmetry between understanding the concept of infinity as a mere abstraction and contemplating the possibility of its real-world instantiation. Transfinite set theory is well understood and completely valid. Nobody's going to drive mathematicians from their self-erected paradise. But there are a number of paradoxes that arise when applying the concept of the actual infinite to the real world. The most well-known example is Thompson's lamp. The scenario depicts a lamp connected to a switch. One starts by flicking the lamp on for a minute. Then one turns the lamp off for half a minute. Then one turns it on for the quarter of a minute, and after that one turns the lamp off again for the eighth of a minute, and so it continues according to this pattern. This scenario is what is called a supertask, an infinite number of operations carried out within a finite amount of time. After 2 minutes, the switch was toggled infinitely many times. But is the lamp switched on or off? After every odd numbered switch, the lamp is on. After every even numbered switch, it's off. But infinity is neither odd nor even. So what state results from an infinity of switches? The problem is that in this scenario, there are infinitely many switches occurring, so there isn't any last switch. But to say that a series of events is complete without a last step is just mind-boggling. Even more absurd is the new Zeno paradox. Let's say there is an infinite amount of gods, each of them with the goal of stopping a man from walking a certain distance. So Peter wants to walk a mile from A to B, but before he can finish the mile, a god raises a wall stopping him from completing the mile. And before he can walk half a mile, a different god raises a wall so that he can finish the half mile. But before he can walk a quarter of a mile, there's a different god yet again to raise a wall so that he cannot walk the quarter of a mile, and so on and so forth. This means that before Peter could have walked any distance, he would have already been stopped by some god raising a wall. But if Peter cannot walk any distance without being stopped by a wall, he simply cannot move. So Peter is stuck at A. But what stops him from moving? Nothing, it seems. No god does anything if Peter does not move. And yet Peter can't move because before he could walk any distance, he would have already been stopped. So the mere intention of these gods stops him? That's intellectually unbearable. Or consider the following scenario. At 12 o'clock a bell rings so loud that it turns any listener deaf. Yet at 11:30 a different bell rings that turns any listener deaf as well. And yet at 11:15 a different bell rings that turns any listener deaf. And so on ad infinitum. So it's perfectly clear that after 12 o'clock Peter is deaf. There were infinitely many deafening bells that rang. But which one turned him deaf? Once he's deaf, he won't hear the subsequent bells. So since at 11:30 a bell rang, he didn't hear the one at 12 o'clock. And since at 11:15 a bell rang, he didn't hear the one at 11:30. For every bell, there is a bell that rang before it and would have turned Peter deaf. So Peter never heard any of the bells. But if he never heard any of the bells, why is he deaf? Or imagine that there are infinitely many distinct Grim Reapers. You are alive at midnight. Grim Reaper number 1 will strike you dead at 1 AM if you are still alive at that time, otherwise he does nothing. Grim Reaper number 2 will strike you dead at 12:30 AM if you are still alive then, otherwise he does nothing. Grim Reaper number 3 will strike you dead at 12:15 AM, and so on and so forth. It seems perfectly clear that no Grim Reaper could ever kill you, because a different Grim Reaper would have already killed you before, and so he would do nothing. So no Grim Reaper can kill you. And yet you simply cannot be alive after 1 AM, because if you're alive at 1 AM, a Grim Reaper will kill you. And that is simply a logical contradiction. Now consider the following. Peter is sitting in a chair in a line of chairs with others to the left and right. Everyone has a number. Let's say Peter has a number n. The person to the left n-1, and to the right n+1, and so on and so forth. Each person in the line does the following. They will receive a sheet of paper from the person on the left. If the sheet is blank, the person should write their number on it. If a number is already on it, they should make no mark on the paper. After that, the person should then pass that paper to the person on their right. So when Peter gets the paper, what's on it? Obviously, There have been infinitely many people before who would have written the number on it if they received it blank, so no way Peter gets a blank sheet. But none of them could have written the number on it, since the person next to them should have already done so. So the paper cannot be blank, nor can it contain a number. All of these scenarios produce nonsensical results, some of them outright logically contradictory ones. The reason for this lies in the instantiation of an infinite amount of sequential steps that are said to have occurred at some point. We have two types of sequential chains: those that are lacking a first member and those that are lacking a last one. The problem is that all states that are obtained do depend on a previous state without there being an initial step in the sequence. The chain is causally disconnected from any previous state, since a previous state would have to be causally related to some first member of the chain. But there isn't any. There is no last member of the chain to connect it with anything outside of itself. The problem seems to be the application of the concept of infinity with the nature of sequential causal chains. The members of such sequences depend on their previous members, not just in a temporal sense, but also in a logical sense. Their existence is, in that sense, a dependent existence. Each member defines the status of the next one, but one cannot breach infinity. The chains either cannot relate to any previous sequence or any posterior sequence. They cannot be embedded in a larger sequence, since they lack either a first or a last member. So while mathematicians can have a lot of fun with actually infinite sets and their cardinalities, real-world scenarios involving infinities will always remain problematic. One man's paradise is another's hell, it seems.